were subservient to men. They were not allowed to vote. They could not hold public office. They could not even be referred to by name in public. It was as if they simply did not exist except in the context of their marriage, because they were just considered a man's property. So why would a woman be chosen for this all-important post? I mean, there were leaders and kings and heads of state going to her to receive these prophecies. She was held in that high regard. But the ancient Greeks actually believed in a dual nature. They believed in both the feminine and the masculine, and that's why there were gods and goddesses in the Greek pantheon. So if you think about, even Zeus had a wife, right? Her name was Hera. And they famously argued and bickered, and he cheated on her with everybody. I mean, it was just kind of a crazy situation, but she was a strong woman, and her will was actually made known, through disaster, like earthly disasters and things such as that. So, so it was very interesting that women were deified, to a certain degree, but common women were really kept, under men's thumbs. But the priestesses were selected based on the deity they served. So if there was a temple of Athena, the goddess of wisdom, only a priestess could serve Athena because she was a female deity. So in the case of Apollo, who was a male god, a priestess might seem like an odd choice. But basically what happened here is that the sanctuary was originally devoted to the Earth Mother, as we said earlier. And because the Greeks were a superstitious lot, they still are actually, so they didn't want to take any chances. So Apollo may have taken over the sanctuary, but the Earth Goddess was there first. And so the choice of the priestess was to actually honor the original inhabitant, lest they suffer her wrath. And nobody wants the wrath of the Earth Mother, let me tell you. So actually, it turned out to be a good move for Apollo and his followers. So the Pythia was originally a young girl. She was chosen for her purity and innocence, and therefore her unsullied ability to carry out the god's wishes. So the ritual went something like this. So about once a year, on Apollo's birthday, people would come from all over the land to pose their questions to the Pythia, who would then give them answers while she was in a trance and speaking in tongues, actually. So presumably she was speaking the words of Apollo because Apollo had taken over her body. He had commanded, I guess, her body and her mind while she was in this state. So the supplicants hung by her every word because her words were divinely inspired. So before she could utter the words of Apollo, she had to go through this entire ritual. Oh. Let's see. Let's try this. My pointer doesn't work. So this ritual was one of purification. She would bathe in the Castalian spring, which is actually just down the mountain from Delphi, from the sanctuary, and then she would drink the sacred waters of a spring called Cassotis. She would chew laurel leaves because laurel was sacred to Apollo, and then she would adorn herself with laurel wreaths and carry branches of laurel as well. And then, accompanied by her retinue, she would walk along the sacred way to the sanctuary and then take her place inside the adyton, or inner sanctum. This is actually a picture of the Castalian spring today. It's dried up, actually, and this is what the fountain looks like now. So, obviously, we know that this was a pretty grand structure. It was something that was not taken lightly. They had erected a pretty serious, structure for bathing and purifying back then. And it wasn't just the Pythia who bathed here. Every seeker who came looking for an oracle would have to go and purify himself here before going in to see her. Okay, so this is actually where it gets interesting. The priestess would actually sit on a tripod, which, my pointer is really not working. but you can see she's actually sitting on a tripod in this rendering, and this was positioned on top of a great fissure that supposedly emanated sweet-smelling vapors that came forth from the earth. And the vapors would essentially make her high. They would cause her to enter this trance. And during the trance, she would just flail about and speak unintelligibly in a strange voice, a hoarse voice, almost like the voice of a man. And that is how she communicated the words of Apollo. So it was a very theatrical situation, but it was also very dangerous too. There are actually records of more than one of these priestesses dying after a particularly intense session. So she's speaking in tongues, and allegedly she was also speaking in iambic pentameter verse, which, I don't know how many of you know poetry, because that's kind of hard to do. But many of her words were interpreted by the priests in attendance, and then given to the supplicants. And there have been several famous oracles that have been recorded by various historians. And I prepared a couple of my favorites. Actually, there are so many, there are hundreds of them. There are probably like 500 or 600 that have survived through antiquity. But in 480 BCE, when King Xerxes of Persia famously came to conquer Greece, okay, the Athenians went and consulted the oracle, because you don't enter into battle without consulting the oracle. And so this is what they were told. Now your statues are standing and pouring sweat. They shiver with dread. The black blood drips from the highest rooftops. They have seen the necessity of evil. Get out of my sanctum, and drown your spirits in woe. I don't know that I would want to receive that oracle, but but it's pretty poetic, you know, if nothing else. And then the Spartans, who were not friends of the Athenians. They were actually independent city-states, and most of the time they were at odds with each other. So the Spartans went and consulted the oracle too. At the same time, 480 BCE, about the same topic. They kind of wanted to know what to do. And this is what the oracle told them. Hear your fate, O dwellers in Sparta of the wide spaces. Either your famed great town must be sacked by Perseus' sons, or if that be not, the whole land of Lacedaemon shall mourn the death of the king of the house of Heracles. For not the strength of lions or of bulls shall hold him. Strength against strength, for he has the power of Zeus, and will not be checked until one of these two he has consumed. So this was very prophetic, okay? I think we're all familiar with this battle. If we're at all familiar with Greek history, we know that this refers to the battle at Thermopylae, where King Leonidas of Sparta actually took 300, right, the 300 of his mightiest men to this mountain pass and tried to hold off this great Persian army. It was crazy. It was you know, certainly folly. But, you know, 300 men would not possibly be able to hold back such a mighty army. But the king of Sparta took these words to heart. You know, basically what the oracle said is, either he's going to rip your city to shreds, or he's going to kill you. And so he said, okay, I'm not going to let that happen to my city, so I'm going to put myself on the line, and if he takes me, then he'll leave Sparta alone. And that's actually exactly what happened. All the 300 died, including the king. And then around the same time, when it was obvious that the Persian invasion was inevitable, the Delphians themselves consulted the oracle about what can be done to hold back this mighty enemy. And the Pythia's response was, pray to the winds, for they will prove to be a mighty ally of Greece. And that's actually exactly what happened. So after the Persians were done with the 300, after they had sort of annihilated them, they sailed to Cape Artemisium, which is where the Athenian armada was waiting to block their entry into Athens. And just as the oracle predicted, there were 3 days of great winds, and it actually crippled the Persians. I mean, they actually lost a lot of their ships during these winds at Artemisium. I mean, they were still standing at the end, but they were at maybe half their armada by the time they entered into the next battle at Salamis. And that's actually when they were defeated and then sent home packing. So at that point, when the oracle was at the height of her glory, and she had predicted all these, amazing, happenings of history, and predicted them with great detail. And she was certainly considered the most powerful woman in Greece. Now, it is important to know that every one of the Pythia's predictions have come true, but it had to be interpreted correctly, okay? So a lot of her prediction, a lot of her prophecies were not cut and dry. I mean, she would actually, give direction. It was really up to you to know what she's really saying. So this is a very famous one that was misinterpreted. It says, if you cross the river Halys, a great empire would be destroyed. So this was a prophecy that was handed to King Croesus of Lydia when he inquired about crossing over into Persia so he can expand his empire. So Croesus, of course, interpreted this as a favorable oracle. So a great empire, meaning Persia, would be destroyed. So Croesus famously crossed the river into Persia on the oracle's advice, and the great empire that was destroyed was his own. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the trance state that the priestess would enter and how that came to be, because this is, I think, kind of a fascinating story. You remember we said that, that there were fumes emanating from a fissure in the earth, and she was sitting on top of that fissure, and that's what presumably intoxicated her. So there's actually a true geological explanation for this. Greece sits at the confluence of three sort of geological faults, of three tectonic plates which shift, and that's why Greece is such a seismic area. So when the plates shift, they cause faults, and according to a study that was published in Geology magazine, 2 of those faults intersect directly below the sanctuary at Delphi. The study traces back to the 1980s when a geologist named Yeda de Boer began doing research there. And prior to that, dating to even as early as the 1800s, a lot of archaeologists actually tried to figure this part out and could not. They could not find any evidence of faults. Now, de Boer, at the time, was not even doing this type of work. I mean, he was there doing work on behalf of the UN and the Greek government to identify active fault lines. He wasn't trying to be an archaeologist. And then in the 1990s, he met an American archaeologist named John Hale, who became very interested in the evidence. And then the 2 of them partnered together to look into this further. And long story short, they uncovered 2 faults, the Delphi fault and the Kurna fault, that actually intersected right here beneath the Temple of Apollo. So now, geological surveys had already identified the rock beneath the temple as bituminous, meaning that it was oil-bearing. So the petrochemicals in the rock could actually release gases when slippage along the fault lines would heat the rock. So what are these hydrocarbon gases that would be released? Well, namely, they're ethylene, methane, and ethane, all of which are intoxicants. But because we have heard from history that the gases were actually sweet-smelling, we can assume that it was ethylene rather, that she was inhaling because that has that sweet smell. I want to show you a fun little video that was done by National Geographic. It's really short, and that actually describes this concept, I think, very well.
Goes. Oracle of Delphi, speaking for the god Apollo, told him he would kill his father and marry his mother. As many of us learn in school, despite all his efforts, Oedipus was unable to escape his disastrous destiny in maybe the most famous of Greek tragedies.
In antiquity, just like today, people had a lot of uncertainties in life, and they presumed that the gods knew more than they did. And in particular, they thought Apollo knew a lot. So they would travel here basically to ask Apollo for advice or to ask him questions and hope that he'd give an answer.
If Apollo was a musician, then his priestess, the Pythia, was his instrument. Ancient records tell of mystical, sweet-smelling vapors rising from the earth, putting the Pythia under Apollo's spell. But while the reciting of prophecies is historical fact, questions about those vapors remain.
Green area until
Archaeologist John Hale believes the answers lie deep underground. Analysis of the bedrock beneath the temple also shows the existence of petrochemicals, including ethylene. Ethylene has been used as an anesthetic in modern days, but when administered in experimental small doses, induced a trance-like state.
And the trance state had a lot of similarities with the description of the Pythia there at the Temple of Delphi.
Scholars think water running underground could have carried gases up through the fault lines, directly to the priestess. The ancients believed ordinary people could meet the gods at Delphi, a point of contact between man and mystery. In a way, they were right. Modern science suggests that here, the supernatural was in fact simply natural.
Kind of a, I think, just short and sweet video that illustrates the concept by National Geographic TV. So there is actually a belief, in antiquity anyway, that earthquakes were responsible for opening up this chasm and heating the rock to the point that the gases spewed forth from the earth. So there was, we know from history that there was a huge earthquake in this region in 373 BCE, and that was when Delphi was at the height of its power. But then the seismic activity stopped, and in fact there had been no earthquake for some 300 years. And of course the vapors diminished, which then devalued the currency of the oracle. I mean, no gases equals no prophecies, right? So Delphi's influence waned at that point, and of course the final nail in its coffin was the advent of Christianity around the 4th century of the Common Era. And the newly minted Christians were actually repulsed by the pagan practices here, so they destroyed temples like Delphi and dispersed those institutions. And that was actually the last time an oracle was uttered there. At least until my book comes out and you see that everything has been recreated. Okay, so that was the most famous of the Oracles of Antiquity, but this one, the Oracle of Trophonius, was perhaps the most mysterious. So according to Pausanias, who was an ancient travel writer, the journey into the cave of Trophonius was a maddening, terrifying experience, akin to experiencing death and then living to tell about it. I will give you the abbreviated version of what Pausanias wrote, but first let's look at where it is. It's actually right here. It's very near Delphi, actually, in central Greece, in a town called Livadia. And there aren't many traces here of the temples as Pausanias wrote about it, but we'll get back to that and sort of reenact it a little bit. But this is what Pausanias had to say. So this is what happens when you go down into the holy place. First, during the night, you are taken to the river Herkina by 2 local boys who rub you with oil and wash you. After this, you are escorted by the priests, not to the oracle straight away, but to 2 streams that flow very close to each other. First, you drink the water of one, which is the water of Lethe, so you can forget all your current preoccupations. And then you drink the water of the other, which is the spring of Mnemosyne, which makes you remember what you see after you go down. After looking at the statue of the god, which is only shown by the priests to those who visit Trophonius, you worship it and pray. Then you proceed to the oracle, dressed in a linen tunic and wearing stout boots. A lot of detail. So the oracle is up the mountain past the grove. Around it is a circular white marble base, and if my pointer worked, I would actually point to these, but it's actually number 1. That's I have labeled them so you can sort of follow along. This is a reenactment of what that oracle looked like. So around it is a circular white marble base, about 1 meter high and the size of a very small threshing floor. On this are bronze spikes held together by bronze crosspieces. You pass through a double door to enter the sanctuary. Inside is a man-made cave shaped rather like a bread oven, with the entrance 2 meters high and about 4 meters across. You descend on a thin, light ladder. After climbing down, you find a horizontal hole between the floor and the structure. The hole is about 25 centimeters wide and 50 centimeters high. It's pretty small, actually. The descender lies with his back on the ground, just like you see right there in this rendering. And he puts his feet into the hole and tries to get his knees into it. And once his knees are there, then the rest of his body gets sucked in, just like as a large, quick-flowing river will catch a man in its eddy and suck him under. After this, those who have entered the shrine learn the future. Sometimes they see something, sometimes they hear it. They return upwards by the same hole, the feet sliding out first. After his ascent from Trophonius, the inquirer, who is paralyzed with terror and unconscious of himself and his surroundings, is again taken by the priest to the chair of memory and is asked about what he has seen. Eventually, he will recover all his faculties. Now, this is all, I actually read direct quotes from Pausanias, so you have it straight from the horse's mouth. He also said this. He said, "What I write is not hearsay. I have myself inquired of Trophonius and seen other inquirers. Those who have gone down into the shrine of Trophonius have to dedicate a tablet on which is written all that they have seen or heard." So Pausanias was actually a participant in this oracle. That's why we have so much great detail of what it looked like. But to this day, there is no really good evidence of this exact structure. I mean, there are theories, there are caves where supposedly this is where it took place, but none of this structure with a hole that you put your knees through, exists. Again, until my book comes out. So who was Trophonius? Go. I looked for a fig leaf, but PowerPoint didn't have that. Trophonius was one of 2 brothers, the other one being Agamedes, who were the architects and builders of the Temple of Apollo at Delphi. Okay, so this is according to a Homeric hymn, and Homer doesn't tell us which one of the temples, since of course the Temple of Apollo was destroyed and rebuilt several times through history. But anyway, the brothers built the Temple of Apollo, and they had also built a treasury for King Hyprius in Livadia. And this king was actually very wealthy, and they had built this treasury so he could store his gold there. But they also knew the ins and outs of the chamber, so they decided that they would pilfer a little bit of the treasure for themselves. So they entered stealthily and removed the gold a little at a time, and the king somehow got wind of it and laid a snare to trap them. And on the next foray, the brothers got trapped. Actually, one of them, Agamedes, the brother of Trophonius, got trapped. And then Trophonius got scared that his brother was going to, spill it about, what they had been doing. So he allegedly cut off his brother's head. And then he was feeling very guilty and ran off and went into hiding in this cave in Livadia. And that actually became known as the Cave of Trophonius. But the oracles didn't happen there until after his death. So what was different about this oracle was that there was no priestess or priest present. This was entirely a journey into oneself. I mean, the priest would guide you and sort of tell you where to go and how to descend, and they would prepare you for it, but they would not go down with you, and you would not consult a priest for your oracle. This was a journey into oneself. So the person seeking the oracle would descend by himself, he'd get pulled in by some supernatural force, and then lie there in perfect, terrifying darkness until a message was revealed to him in either visual or auditory fashion. So in a sense, it was some kind of torture or shock treatment based on sensory deprivation. But each supplicant was required to keep this experience to himself, for it was a very mystical and personal journey. Even Pausanias, who tells us he speaks from first-hand experience, with all the great detail he gave about the cave itself, does not tell us anything about what it felt like to be in there and what he saw or heard. So he never elaborated on the actual experience, only the nuts and bolts details. So our knowledge of the Oracle of Trophonius, of course, is very limited. And I would like to show you a very short video produced by the Foundation of the Hellenic World. So the Greeks put this together, and I think did a very good job, and it illustrates all the concepts I've just shared in a 1-minute package. So let's watch. I wish I would do this for all the oracular centers, but I'm kind of geeky that way. So anyway, I guess we would go on forever about oracular centers, because there certainly were many of them, not just in Greece, but throughout North Africa, the Middle East, and parts of Europe, certainly in Italy. But our time today does not permit going into all of them, so I've concentrated, obviously, on some of the most significant and I hope the most fascinating. So now, what do all these stories from antiquity teach us, and how have they impacted modern thought? I guess probably the biggest lesson here is that seeking advice from clairvoyant or clairsentient sources has been ingrained in human nature since the dawn of time. I mean, the examples I've given are clearly pagan, but there are plenty of other examples of oracular consultation, even in the Bible, okay? I mean, the Old Testament, in which the Hebrew priests, back in the 1st and 2nd millennium BCE, consulted a pair of stones called the Urim and Thummim. I think, probably a lot of you are familiar with these stories. These stones were placed inside the breastplate of the high priest, and they were used only on very rare occasions. I mean, it wasn't just something like, okay, well, let's see, who